More was known about the surface of the Moon than the surface of Antarctica until the 1950s, and the little that was known was due to a handful of explorers who endured almost unbelievable hardships. One of these was Ernest Shackleton. He accompanied Scott on the first attempt to reach the pole in 1903, before mounting his own expedition in 1908. After man-hauling supplies more than 700 miles, Shackleton showed his strength of character by turning back just 97 miles short of his goal, because he was sure that they would not be able to make it back if they had continued. After Amundsen had succeeded in being the first to reach the pole, and Scott had died on the return journey from the same destination 1 month later, Shackleton set an even more ambitious goal of crossing the Antarctic continent from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea via the pole itself, a journey of 1,800 miles. In the fall of 1914, his ship, the Endurance, departed Buenos Aires for the remote island of South Georgia. These pictures record her last voyage. The island was a center for whaling, and much of the oil from the huge blue whales, seen here being butchered on its flensing plans, went into the munitions creating carnage on the battlefields of World War I. Shackleton learned from the whalers of extensive ice much further north than usual, and they advised him to head well east in the Weddell Sea and to delay his departure. She finally left South Georgia on December the 5th, but encountered ice within 2 days. Endurance got within 16 miles of her destination on the Antarctica continent before the ice closed around and held her in its iron grip. Heroic efforts were made to cut a path through to an open lead just a few hundred yards ahead. With Shackleton looking anxiously over the bow, she tried, but failed, to ram her way through. She never moved again. These rare color photos taken by Frank Hurley, the expedition photographer, show her trapped in the ice. On February the 15th, Shackleton declared Endurance his winter station. One of the many chores keeping the crew busy was the daily collection of ice for fresh water. The whole ice pack was drifting north, taking Endurance with it. As they moved away from the pole, and as the season passed from winter to summer, temperatures rose, and huge icebergs began to plow through the pack, forcing up pressure ridges. Determined efforts were made to relieve the pressure, but by September the ship had been forced over to one side and her stern post torn open. Shackleton went aboard and found that she was only being kept afloat by spears of ice which had penetrated the hull. He ordered the ship abandoned. Dogs and supplies were offloaded, and camp made on the ice. A last issue of clothing was distributed. Under the relentless pressure, the ship continued to break up and presented a tragic and forlorn sight. In Shackleton's own words, "What the ice gets, the ice keeps." The expedition was now in a desperate situation, with 28 men and 67 dogs camped on the ice pack, with no way to contact the outside world. Strenuous efforts were made to cross the pack towards the Antarctic Peninsula, but due to the chaotic surface of the ice, this proved to be impossible. The pack was drifting faster than they could move the sledges or drag the boats, which would soon be critical for their survival. As they drifted towards the fringe of the pack, the ice began to break up, so the party soon found themselves confined to ever smaller floes. Finally, they took to the boats and made for the only piece of land accessible to them due to the wind and the current. Through rough seas, all boats made it safely to Elephant Island, the bleakest and most precipitous of the South Shetland Islands. Even so, this was the first solid land under their feet since they had left South Georgia 16 months earlier. Shackleton knew that no one would ever find them here, and that their only hope of rescue was to sail to South Georgia, 800 miles away over the roughest ocean in the world. Just 22 feet long, the James Caird was decked over and half filled with stones to act as ballast. 9 days after they landed on Elephant Island, Shackleton, accompanied by 5 others, departed on this do-or-die mission. After 16 days they made landfall on the tiny speck of South Georgia in the immensity of the Southern Ocean, but they barely escaped being wrecked on the storm-lashed offshore reefs. It took 5 attempts to get ashore, and even now they had yet to cross the island to reach the whaling stations on the other coast. These pictures give some idea of the terrain that Shackleton, with 2 companions, had to contend with. On one high ridge, in desperation with night falling and temperatures plummeting, they launched themselves down a steep ice slope, sitting on a coil of rope, with no idea what lay ahead. They descended this waterfall to the Stromness whaling station and made their way to the manager's house, where they were not recognized due to their disheveled condition. The house, which can still be visited today, has a plaque commemorating this event. The men left behind with the James Caird on the other side of the island were collected the following day, but ice thwarted Shackleton's plans, and he could get no closer than the Falkland Islands in his attempt to reach his men marooned on Elephant Island. Eventually, on August the 24th, 4 months after he had departed on the James Caird, Shackleton, aboard the Chilean tug Yelcho, returned to Elephant Island, to find that everyone had survived, and not a single man had been lost during the 2-year ordeal. They returned to a tumultuous welcome in Valparaiso, Chile, in September 1916. In 1922, Shackleton organized his last Antarctic expedition. He arrived at Grytviken, South Georgia, on June the 4th, where he collapsed and died of a heart attack aboard his ship, the Quest. He is buried in the Whalers' Cemetery under a granite headstone imported from England. I was ever a fighter, so one fight more, the best and the last. I would hate that death bandaged my eyes and forbore, and bade me creep past. He was just 48 years old. And what of the James Caird? When not on display at sites around the world, she is to be found in the hallway of Shackleton's old school in London. It seems almost inconceivable that this tiny boat is the very same one that played such a vital role in this remarkable story. Outside, the latest generation of schoolboys practice rugby football under the chestnut trees. The Endurance 22 expedition discovered the wreck of the Endurance on March the 5th, 2022, just 4 miles south of the position given by Frank Hurley.